Okay, hello everyone. I'm switching roles basically. Now, talking a bit about users. So I'm one of the co-founders of GrowThePie, and we are essentially a data platform that likes to tell stories through visualizations. So what do we do? Like 3 years ago, we started as a grantee of the ESP program, and we set out to actually show the Ethereum ecosystem. And back then, it was a lot around layer 2s. And obviously, it's still a lot about layer 2s, but we're covering L1 data, layer 2 data, and applications. Because essentially, what do we want out of all of this infrastructure that we're building? We actually want apps, the apps that are being used not only by bots, but also by people and anyone that can make use of crypto rails and so on, and blockchain tech in general. That's why I like to talk a bit about what's actually happening right now in the Ethereum ecosystem as a whole, not only Ethereum mainnet, but also layer 2s. So as I said, GrowThePie data platform, we're covering more than 30 different chains, so that's L1 and layer 2s. And we set out to actually show much more around applications. And so my question to you is actually, who, apart from maybe transferring ETH or a stable coin, who's actually using an app? So show of hands. Okay, so let's say 5 people in the room. So exactly that's the thing, right? Because we are building all this infrastructure, and now what are we actually getting out of it? And I really want to show, okay, what's actually happening right now. That is the Ethereum block space. I hope you can see it with the lighting. That's the Ethereum's block space. So Ethereum, when I talk only about Ethereum, I mean Ethereum layer 1 and layer 2s. So we're covering all these chains. And if you see, all of these bubbles here, they're mostly finance, right? Most of it, if we also take it from a transaction count point of view, is mostly financial transactions. So now if we look at gas fees, so if we now see, okay, app usage or kind of block space usage in terms of gas fees paid, so on Ethereum mainnet, on all layer 2s, it even becomes more stark, this contrast, right? Because most gas fees actually go into financial transactions. And then if we look at a 180-day time frame, it even becomes even more. So in the last 180 days, basically, most people interacting on blockchain have used just, financial things like, swapping, so using Uniswap, and all different sorts of DEXs and so on. And now I actually also want to see, okay, look, when can we actually consider an ecosystem healthy and when not, right? We're always talking about, okay, what's actually going on these different layer 2s? Do they make money? Do they have users? Are they real users and so on? That is a good question. And here again, we see that application, or I want to prove actually that application diversity is a health metric. We're looking at Polygon's block space right now, and you barely see it, but all of this, basically, this huge rectangle is basically Polymarket, the gas fees that Polymarket has paid to Polygon POS chain. So that's more than, usually more than 70% that Polygon's income or revenue, on-chain revenue, is just coming from users interacting on Polymarket. Now, we'll come back to that topic later. Imagine what's actually happening when Polymarket moves away, if they move away, right? So, as a contrast, I have a couple of other layer 2 ecosystems here, or layer 1. Unfortunately, you can't see it that much, but you see a lot of rectangles, right? So you don't see that huge rectangle anymore, that huge empty one, but you see a lot of tiny rectangles. So that means actually that other ecosystems are healthier. Not want to shame anyone here, but it's just that's what we just see in the data, right? So the top left one is Ethereum mainnet, where you see most of it is actually paid by Uniswap, so that's the left rectangle, and then we have some other applications, right? That account abstraction, etc., where gas fees are actually paid. So that's users paying for something to interact on the chain. And moving to the right, that's then Base. Base has, as we all know, Aerodrome Finance, for example, has a lot of Uniswap as well. But on the right now, we see OP Mainnet. That's a slightly red one. And OP Mainnet now has a new entrant. So that's the data from the last 7 days. Does anyone know who that entrant was to OP Mainnet? Why is someone paying now so many gas fees to transact on OP Mainnet? Exactly. So EtherFi used to be on Scroll, layer 2. When I started actually using EtherFi, the card, they have basically a Visa card, right, where you can pay in real life. And every payment is a transaction on chain. And they used to be on Scroll. I didn't even know, to be honest. I only found out because I got cashback in SRC. And that's why I knew, okay, it's actually running on Scroll. So now they moved away from Scroll to OP Mainnet. Come back to that later on. But basically, you see Arbitrum 1, for example, down here. So much healthier, much more rectangles. So what does that mean? If one app would not exist anymore, the chain is not in trouble, right? Because you have so many different other chains actually paying some revenue. Let's see if that comes back. 1 second. Okay. So now another thing is when we look at typical health metrics in crypto, right? We always talk about TVL or TVS. So total value locked means what is actually the values, the tokens that are locked in some protocols on chain. And but it's actually, when you think about it, it's not a health metric, right? It's just a metric that says something to say, look, we have someone there that has a lot of money, but it doesn't mean that there's actually a lot going on the chain. And it also doesn't mean that the chain actually makes money and can sustain itself. That was or is a huge problem, especially with layer 2s, or used to be. When we look at Blast, for example, who still knows Blast? So Blast had this pump in the beginning. There was a lot of TVL coming up, and basically after that nothing happened. So that was basically then also a ghost town with a big vault. So in the end, what you should really track is what we also said, a combination of different things, not just looking at one metric, but a combination of different things that we are always trying to show. So gas fees paid, real users paying fees. Really apps active in the ecosystem, also retention, right? We can see in the data, and I'll show that later, when the users actually come back on a regular basis, right? And also different sector patterns. What activity is it actually that we're looking at and that we're actually seeing? So if you really come back to one of these tree maps still, I know we can't hardly read anything. But basically, as you see, that is kind of a more healthy ecosystem. These are now all chains actually in the Ethereum ecosystem. So you see diversity is happening there as well. So when we then zoom in basically to look at some individual apps, we're looking here at Aave, for example. Aave, as most people probably know in this room, had a bit of an incident in the last couple of weeks, but it was or is one of the most trusted protocols, right, out there. And they also announced in Cannes, for example, that they have a new version of Aave v4. So we were actually looking at, okay, is there already activity happening for Aave v4? And the truth right now is, the TVL is picking up, but there's actually not that much. You hardly see it here again, but there's a couple of hundred transactions basically happening in the last 7 days. Compared to Aave v3, which is highly used. And you also see that spike, right? That is transaction count, this spike, this is active addresses. That was from April 18 onwards, basically, when everyone tried to get out of Aave, right? Because that was like saving their money, basically. Don't want to talk too much about that event, but as we see, like there is just activity happening, and V4 is moving to V4 as well. And we talked about Ether.fi. So Ether.fi, and you see that a tiny bit here. So this was the activity on scroll. So just looking at transaction count in this case. And basically now at this event where the spike was, Ether.fi started now moving to OP mainnet. So obviously kind of in the background now moving all the funds that the users had over from scroll to OP mainnet, and really trying to then make that as silently as possible, which they actually achieved. So now OP mainnet has this new successful application basically that has thousands of transactions a day. Because like people are paying with their Visa card, right? And interestingly, from the data, you can also tell when people are actually using the card. So from that, we are actually working on that, but we're trying to really identify just by looking at the on-chain data, where do the people, or like where are most users based, right? This is like very interesting for app builders because you then can target marketing, product development, and so on much, much better towards one specific region. If you know, okay, my product is already used there quite a lot, and you see all these cycles by the hour, basically. So 24 hours, looking at that, if there's a certain hour always kind of picking up, you see where users are mostly based. And moving on from Ether.fi, because what they basically also did, and one of the reasons actually from moving, why they moved from scroll over to OP mainnet was simply an availability of tokens as well. Because Ether.fi is actually USD based, right? But what they're allowing users now is to use EuroC. Because obviously, again, some argue that non-USD based stablecoins don't make sense. And I argue strongly against that. And I mean, we're at a European Ethereum conference, so I think we should talk about the non-USD stablecoins. Because basically people in the European Union, for example, they want to pay, like whenever you have most of your money in euros, you also want to know, okay, what are you paying in the end? Because the problem with Ether.fi so far was that you always had a foreign exchange rate. Right, so you always had a 1% to 2% markup on any payment that you made in euros, for example. And now by being on OP mainnet, they can now do that in EuroC, so in the native stablecoin denominated in euros. But you see on this chart, 99.6% of stablecoins is still USD based. And we have 0.4% that are now more of an alternative fiat currency, and most of that, 0.3% actually, is euro-based stablecoins. The next one being the Swiss franc. We already heard at the talk before from, I think, Norbert from Dune, already said that or hinted at that. There was a clear winner in the euro-denominated stablecoins, which was EuroC, basically, because they were the first, basically, really compliant MEGA euro stablecoin. And we see in this data also a drop in some others that actually had way more TVL, like EuroT, for example, by Tether. But they were not compliant, and that's why they kind of left this product completely and made room for EuroC. EuroC had 120% growth in 12 months, So now we have a new kind of dominating force in the euro based like stable coins. Next one is EURS, and then Euro CV, where some banks kind of come together and actually kind of issuing their own stable coin. So we see there is momentum happening, and these numbers, especially in the last 12 months, are very green. So we have like 120% growth, we have 80% growth, and so on. So this is clearly a trend that now is like where people are working, or banks, institutions are working on that. And we have the non-USD stable, or like non-euro stablecoin frontier is then the Swiss franc, right? It's Frankencoin, for example. They are now the leading like CHF based stablecoin. And here from their website, I included a screenshot. You can use this stablecoin at Spar, which is basically their, it's like a supermarket everywhere. And you can directly pay in Frankencoin at the supermarket with that. So bypassing basically the Visa network, right? With EtherFi, you still have to go through the Visa network, and with the CHF stablecoin, you don't have to do that anymore. Also, you can also pay, supports that. And that's where we see e-commerce also really moving on chain. This is a chart because we cover the e-commerce protocol by base. And this had, like in the last couple of weeks, had a huge spike. You see that? I don't actually know if you really see that. But this is like a very thin line in the last couple of weeks where it's a huge spike. So more merchants actually kind of integrating with this e-commerce payment by base or on base. And really kind of now everyone's starting to natively pay in USDC. And then we have something that is more connected to the real world, which is MiniPay on Zello. Who has heard of MiniPay in this room? Okay, they're very well known actually in certain regions, especially also in developing countries, have a very, very high usage. We, like for their first year anniversary as a layer 2, because they used to be a layer 1, then last year moved to becoming a layer 2, and they're now one of the most widely used layer 2s out there. And most of this success is actually down to stable coins on chain, basically. So we'll be looking at their block space again, but stable coins really rule the chain. So we have more than 40 million MiniPay wallets in 66 countries. We have 65.9 billion stablecoin volume since the migration. And we have these more than 300,000 daily verified active addresses. So what does that mean? Because MiniPay works with phone numbers, they basically now can verify, okay, it's an actual human being that uses this service. And basically now we can correlate that and really figure out, look, how many are actually now signing up, and what's the comparison to the actual active addresses that we see on Zello actually. Because we say there's more than 840,000 daily active users, but how many of them are actual users, right? Is it just like bots now again interacting, like looking for some volume, or is it basically others? And we have that basically almost half are verified through MiniPay. We also see that these verified users are paying real fees because Zello now increased their base fee, so transactions are way more expensive now, more than double. And we also saw that in the good dollar case, that first of all, the usage dropped because fees was much more expensive now to interact on Zello. But it actually came back to normal standards. So we see that actually users will pay the fee if they really get something out of it, right? So that's a real proof, basically. And we're covering that in the last couple of months. There's not only humans interacting on the Ethereum in the Ethereum ecosystem, but it's more and more agents. So since ERC 8004, We have, like the different layers of identity, reputation, and validation. So we see more and more AI agents really on-chain, and there's more than 17,000 agents live, and they are already hiring other agents, right? So we have the Virtuous protocol, for example, where there's more and more agents kind of launching their own tokens. Also other, let's say, other people or other parties actually now coming in. So we have the Luna example, Luna AI, that is basically an agent on TikTok, has TikTok followers, and is now on Ethereum Rails, basically. I think it's on Base, where you actually see, look, there's now other people coming into crypto, which is actually a good sign, right? It's not just the same people all over again that we see, but it's now finally new people actually also coming in from different areas. And yeah, gaming is the other category that everyone wants to crack. But in the chart, we actually don't really see that being back to the levels that we saw, like let's say also in 2024, for example, where the metaverse was the thing to do, right? Everyone wanted to be like Meta, even kind of renamed to Meta, or like it was even earlier, I think, 22. But it's slowly coming back, and Starknet is one of the ones that push it quite a lot with individual apps like Loot Survivor, for example. They see quite some traction in the gaming market there. Also, sometimes, or some chains, actually, for them it works too well. There was a card playing game on Mega ETH. It's called It's the Season, and they actually had to pause the game because someone figured out how to interact with the smart contract directly using AI, and basically cracked everything in the game, and then kind of got all these kind of cards that were supposed to be like played for and to earn it, and got them all straight away within like seconds using AI, basically. So this is like a learning, I guess. So out of what I want to get out of that is like app demand really drives chain fees, and it's not the other way around. So me as a product designer with a design background, I actually like to see that people really use crypto whenever there is a real need for it, and if it has some real life connection. And it's also a risk, right? I hinted at Polymarket before in the beginning of my talk, that Polygon POS is totally dependent on Polymarket as one app, right? So remember, 75% of the fees are paid by Polymarket on Polygon POS. And basically, Polygon can now pretty much forecast whenever they have a high revenue, right? Because whenever Super Bowl is happening, which is next year in February, they will have probably $150,000 that they make in revenue a day. But it's just, again, very risky to just base all your revenue on one app. So this is, I think, a clear sign how important it is to kind of have a diversified ecosystem and really, have looking like also builders animating or motivating builders to look at alternatives and not just the financial side of things. But clearly right now out of this talk, it's clear that we have mostly financial applications still, which is also good because we have that real demand, but I hope that we also see other things coming up in the near future, around privacy, about Aztec just launched, and many other apps that are out there. And yeah, finally, we want to show these application metrics. So if you're a builder, label your contracts through our page, then you show up, you get free application metrics. I think that's very essential for builders to get that free marketing. And by the way, because I talked about bringing new people into the ecosystem, we're trialing something. We released an iOS app. I hope you can actually scan that, or just look for it if you have an iPhone on the App Store, kind of really showcasing, applications that are now running in the Ethereum ecosystem and kind of bringing new users into the ecosystem, hopefully. Okay, I think I'm right on time, and thank you very much. Unfortunately, no time for questions, but come find me later. I'll be here the whole weekend. Thank you very much.